I've lived in Los Angeles a long time. I vaguely remember the Watts riots in 1965, where hundreds of minority owned businesses were destroyed and 35 people were killed. Many people back then felt that the violence was an understandable reaction to Jim Crow laws, which had only recently been abolished. Other people wondered how that worked, given that there never were Jim Crow laws in California. Others blamed poverty and poor living conditions. The flashpoint then was like the flashpoint always is now: police brutality. Then, as usually happens now, the actual incident bore little resemblance to what rioters thought had happened. The press called it the Watts Rebellion. Many white motorists were pulled from their cars and beaten. How that was an act of rebellion was never explained. The riots in 1992 were even deadlier, even more destructive. More white motorists were beaten. Police brutality was again the flashpoint. White liberal intellectuals said that the, quote, legacy of slavery, unquote, made the violence understandable if not completely justified. The press called it the Rodney King Uprising. A couple of years later, LA County Superior Court loaded up O.J. Simpson's jury with black people, 8 out of 12, because they knew perfectly well that the town would erupt in violence again if O.J. was convicted. There was much joy when he was acquitted. For years, you could not find a black celebrity who would say that Simpson was guilty, though everybody knew that he was. I myself heard black people say outright that O.J. having butchered 2 white people was, quote, payback, unquote. Imagine being a district attorney and knowing that the jury you accepted would likely vote according to racial bias to set a double murderer free because a famous black man killing 2 ordinary white people was seen as some form of restitution. Through much of the administration of America's first black president, riots erupted regularly when police killed a petty criminal. New York, Baltimore, Ferguson, etc., etc. The empowerment that Obama's presidency brought was not the kind we'd hoped for. And now for 3 months, rioters have punished the people of Portland for the death of a man in Minneapolis, a small-time crook who died in police custody while committing a crime and resisting arrest. 55 years after the Watts riots, it's common to hear liberals, both black and white, excusing this behavior because supposedly the sting of slavery and Jim Crow just never goes away. The grandchildren of the Watts rioters apparently have inherited the pain through their genes, just as the rioters in '65 felt the lash of slavery that had been abolished a century earlier and 2,000 miles away. And now there is a new shooting victim and a new hotspot, Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm sure that the people who torched a family-owned used car dealership that supported BLM felt like that too was payback. Is violence ever justified? Of course. Violence in self-defense, violence needed to save another from being hurt or killed. A just war is simply moral violence to stop immoral violence. But this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about violence being understood as somehow legitimate because the people being violent had deep-seated feelings about wrongs done long ago to others. Events that happen now are said to be greatly amplified by what was done to people long dead by other long dead people. This is just not real. I'm sorry, but it's not. Anybody with so little empathy for an innocent merchant that he or she could bust out the windows and clear the shelves of merchandise is not making a statement about injustice. Looters are making a statement about the moral decay of the looters themselves. And the progressives who condone it are adding their own moral decay to the chorus. What we really see when we watch looting is greed driven by envy and juiced up with a shot of prejudice toward white people. In today's hip-hop culture, themes of shallow materialism are as dominant as those of raw sexuality and violence. The soundtrack of urban youth is rife with self-aggrandizement and callousness. Hip-hop culture is not about empathy. It's ironic that Nike suffers complete inventory decimation every time looting breaks out, because I hold Nike partially responsible for enabling the climate of self-justified theft. When you look at millions of basketball-crazed boys with no fathers and then manipulate them into craving shoes they can never afford, you deserve what you get. Unfortunately, the desire for flash doesn't end with Air Jordans, but extends to dozens of other prestige items that entice kids from behind plate glass. What about the white Portland kids who come in from the suburbs and the working-class neighborhoods alike to yell and scream and vandalize? Are they really so empathetic? Do they really believe that these new black martyrs are saints who end up on the wrong end of a gun while pursuing lives of virtue? Do these white protesters believe that George Floyd and Jacob Blake, through no fault of their own, were discovered by a cop who was eager to trade his job, his reputation, his pension, and likely his freedom for the pleasure of killing a black person? Do they really think that black criminality does nothing to explain why a cop might be jumpy when he pulls over a black guy with an outstanding warrant and a couple of priors? No, these kids are stupid, but nobody is that stupid. Ask those white kids if they'd like to meet you in the blackest neighborhood in town at midnight, and you won't get a single taker. In 1974, I was working for a Cadillac dealership, and one of my jobs was to pick up and deliver cars that came in for service. One busy evening, I dropped off a caddy to a businessman in the Crenshaw district. I was waiting on the street for the chase car long after the client had gone home and the sun had gone down. Two African-American custodians went into the building to do their work. A little while later, one came out and said, "Son, it's not safe for a white boy to be on this street after dark. You come sit inside till your ride comes." That man was saying what everybody knew then and everybody knows now. Black neighborhoods are patrolled by predators who are more than happy to victimize innocent white people. It's payback, you see, maybe not justifiable, but understandable. All laws are based on the same premise. They are rules put in place to prevent people from acting on feelings. The guy who stalks a woman and may rape or kill her, he feels justified too. In his view, he's been wronged. A woman hurt him, and now all women get to take the payback. Civilization became possible because we understood that our baser instincts need to be controlled by a system of laws, laws with teeth. The idea is that no matter how badly you want something that you don't have, the punishment for taking it feels worse than not having it. That no matter how aggrieved you feel, trying to get even will hurt you even more. All of this compassion toward criminals because their ancestors were slaves is not a kindness. Every time you look at somebody doing wrong and decide to indulge your own ego by showing how kind you are, you set that person a few steps back on the path to impulse control, delayed gratification, and a life of dignity. You move him a step away from the goodness showed me by those two black custodians on a long ago evening in a rough part of town, and a few steps toward the lives of the gangsters they protected me from. Now let's just say what nobody else seems able to say. Payback over police brutality is simply another form of gang violence. Why are there so many murders of blacks by other blacks? Well, the vast majority of those killings are just payback too. One gang killing members of the other gang over a real or perceived offense. What liberal academics say is a generational rage created long ago by slavers is actually nothing more than the human penchant for revenge that arises in any population where law and order has broken down. When George Floyd died in the custody of white cops, the ensuing violence was really only gang violence. The guys in police cars are the gang of rules and discipline, and the people who burned buildings and stole everything in sight are the gang of moral lassitude and chaos. All that we are seeing in Portland these 90-something days later is a turf war between those of all colors who work hard and build civilization every single day and those who refuse to take on that responsibility, two opposing gangs. The violence in Ferguson, Baltimore, and all the way back to Watts was just gang violence harnessed by race hustlers for their own purposes, and it's about damn time that somebody said so. Maybe I've lived in a fully integrated neighborhood too long to think that I would do a service to my black neighbors by covering for the worst people with whom they share a skin color. The only division I see here or anywhere is between good people and not so good people. I'm not confused about which club I try to belong to, and I'm not confused as to the role that color plays in that, because it plays no role at all. Yes, some people were slaves a long time ago, and some people were humiliated by Jim Crow laws a long time ago. That is an ugly mark on our history. But as of right now, being black in America is more or less the catbird seat. The black Americans who understand that and are building the vibrant middle class that seems to have its spiritual core in Atlanta, Georgia, belong to the gang of hard work and dignity. And every mean-spirited vandal masquerading as a social justice warrior belongs to the gang of immaturity, entitlement, and sloth. That's where our fight is, people. Let's not be confused into thinking that all the gains we've made toward racial normalization are erased every time some punk challenges a cop and ends up dead. The dead person's color is irrelevant, as is the color of the cop. The division is between order and chaos, and we all need to choose a side and get into the fight. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel and then click the little bell to get notifications.